Her daughter-in-law laughed at her pension in front of the whole family. Maggie Langford, retired executive and mother, didn't flinch. Ethan, her son, chuckled beside his wife, blind to the foundation beneath their feet. By Monday, HR memos Sophie authored would be routed back to the woman who silently owned the company's highest vote. Maggie had once let them believe she was obsolete. Now they'd learn. Silence was not surrender. It was structure. We're about to begin, but if you'd like, share where you're joining from. It reminds me this story doesn't echo into silence. It lands somewhere real. Drop it in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe. Brunch had always been my small peace offering to the family, a ritual of civility where the china gleamed, the fog hung low over the bay, and conversation skimmed the surface like swans too proud to dive. But that Sunday, something in the air felt sharper. I could feel it before she spoke. Sophie's laughter, too loud for the room. The way she checked her phone between bites like the rest of us were a slow-loading page. Ethan poured himself another mimosa, his sleeve brushing hers, their shared rhythm of impatience. "Mom," he said, "Sophie just got promoted, head of HR for the whole division." "That's wonderful," I said. "Congratulations, Sophie." She smiled the way some people do before a punchline. "Thanks. It's exhausting, though. The older employees can be so stuck in their ways. Half of them still talk about pensions." Her eyes flicked toward me. Imagine that, thinking a pension could buy a coffee these days. The table chuckled. Ethan, too, reflexively. Even Lucy giggled, not understanding, just following her father's cue. I stirred my tea slowly, the silver spoon tapping against porcelain like a clock counting down. "Good thing I drink mine black," I said, smiling. Sophie rolled her eyes. "No wonder you retired. You'd never survive in tech." Her voice carried the gloss of youth, the kind that believes its own invincibility. I looked at her across the table. Flawless skin, diamond bracelet catching light, confidence built on borrowed scaffolding. For a moment, I envied the ease of her arrogance. Then the envy cooled into something older. The air thickened with polite laughter. Caleb's old words came back to me, whispered years ago in a mahogany boardroom. "You built empires while they built resumes." I had shrugged then, thinking legacy didn't matter. But sitting here, listening to my daughter-in-law laugh about my obsolescence, I realized legacy only sleeps until someone pokes it. Ethan reached for the fruit bowl. "Mom, you remember when you almost invested in crypto? You dodged a bullet there?" I smiled faintly. "I've made a few good bets in my life." Sophie smirked. "You mean when things were simpler?" She didn't see it. The small flicker in Ethan's eyes when I said nothing. He'd grown up resenting my calm. I used to think he wanted my approval. Now I saw he wanted my absence of doubt. Lucy looked at me over her orange juice. "Grandma, what's a pension?" Before I could answer, Sophie laughed again. "It's what people had before real work existed." The sound landed like glass breaking inside my chest. I took a slow breath. Looked at the bay through the window, the mist curling over the water like secrets rising. "You're right, dear," I said softly. "Real work these days is surviving the noise." No one responded. A waiter refilled coffee, the small hiss of the pot filling the silence. Ethan shifted in his seat, glancing between us as if calculating the cost of speaking. I reached for my napkin, folding it with precision. "You'll excuse me," I said, rising. "I promised myself I'd walk home today." Sophie blinked, caught off guard by my calm. "In this weather?" "Seattle's rain, and I have an understanding." Her smile faltered just slightly. Suit yourself. I leaned down, kissed Lucy's forehead. You keep asking questions, sweetheart. Questions build empires. She nodded solemnly, and for a moment her small hand squeezed mine with surprising strength. I felt that connection, pure, uncalculated. It reminded me who I still was beneath the civility. As I reached the door, Ethan called out, "Mom, don't forget your umbrella." I turned back. I never do. The door closed behind me with a soft click, muffling the polite laughter that resumed as if nothing had cracked. Outside, the drizzle met my face, cool and clarifying. I walked toward the waterfront, shoes tapping against the wet pavement, pulse steady. There's a kind of silence only the truly underestimated ever hear, the silence before the pendulum swings back. Caleb's words echoed again, steadier this time. You built empires while they built resumes. I smiled to myself, adjusting my scarf. Let's see who really signs the paychecks. Seattle's drizzle has a rhythm you either learn to love or let drown you. That afternoon, it felt almost conspiratorial, soft enough to think, sharp enough to sting. My reflection trailed beside me in the glass storefronts, a woman both invisible and watching. Each step home unspooled the brunch conversation again. Sophie's laughter, the faint humiliation disguised as civility. But now that sting had cooled into something deliberate. I've learned that fury, when aged properly, turns into focus. My house sat quiet on the waterfront, the kind of silence only earned by time. I left my coat dripping near the door and turned on the low lamp by the entryway table. The mail waited where I'd dropped it that morning. Neat stacks of envelopes and brown folders, each carrying pieces of the life I'd chosen to keep private. I slit them open one by one, the habit of an old executive who still prefers paper to pixels. Dividend checks, routine but satisfying. Foundation updates. Our scholarship numbers were up this quarter. A small victory in a world that rewards noise over nuance. Then came an envelope with a corporate logo pressed in navy foil. The name hit me before my brain caught up. Aventra Systems. Sophie's company. My company, though she didn't know it. I unfolded the letter carefully. Employee Relations Annual Review. The header read. I skimmed the first paragraph, recognizing language I'd helped craft decades ago. Integrity, accountability, culture. The irony drew a dry laugh from me. My thumb traced the embossed logo. Of course, I murmured. The rain ticked harder against the windows, as if seconding the thought. The irony of it all. The young woman lecturing me about obsolescence worked beneath the structure I built, quite literally. I remembered the late nights with Caleb drafting the first term sheets, the cautious optimism of funding young engineers who dreamed bigger than their budgets. I'd been the quiet investor, the silent backbone. And maybe that silence had gone on too long. I carried the mail into the kitchen, placed the letter on the counter, and made myself tea. No sugar, no indulgence. The steam curled upward like an invitation to act. Somewhere between sips, the decision made itself. I dialed Caleb's number from memory. He answered on the second ring, his voice as warm and wry as ever. Maggie Langford. To what do I owe this rare pleasure on a Sunday? Observation, I said, and correction. He chuckled softly. Ah, someone finally poked the bear. Not a bear, I said, sitting at the breakfast nook overlooking the gray water. A lioness, though she thinks she's safe behind corporate glass. Let me guess, he said. The daughter-in-law. She laughed at my pension. Brave of her. Stupid, more like. But stupidity has a short shelf life when the supply chain is mine. He laughed. low and genuine. Time to remind the young of who built their office towers? I smiled into my tea. Exactly. He grew quiet. You know, Maggie, you've avoided pulling rank for years. Are you sure you want to wake the ghosts? I'm not chasing ghosts, I said. I'm auditing arrogance. That earned a pause, then a small whistle. Still the accountant, I see. No, I corrected gently. Now the accountant wakes. Outside, the fairy horn moaned across the sound, distant and heavy. It had the sound of inevitability. I ended the call, promising to see him in the morning. The house settled into its usual rhythm, heater humming, waves brushing the pier, but something in me had shifted. I walked to my study, opened the old walnut desk, and pulled out a slim folder marked Aventra Holdings, Private Equity. Numbers stared back at me like old friends, share distributions, voting rights, executive structures. Every line a thread I could tug if I chose. For years, I'd let Ethan and Sophie live in their illusion of independence. I'd thought it kinder that way. But kindness, I was realizing, has an expiration date when it turns into permission. I closed the folder and glanced at the rain-soaked window. My reflection looked back, softer now, but with something glinting beneath the calm. The drizzle turned into rain proper, steady, cleansing, relentless. I whispered to the empty room, "Let's see if they notice the weather's changing." By Monday morning, the rain had cleaned the city into something almost reflective. Glass towers catching shy sunlight, streets still glistening with the residue of last night's storm. I stood at the window, tea in hand, watching the commuter ferries cut through the bay. Somewhere in that skyline, Sophie was already at her desk, probably rehearsing authority into her voice. I hadn't planned to think of her. But arrogance has a way of writing its own reminder. My phone buzzed just as I sat down at the desk. Emma Frost. Caleb's daughter, sharp as her father, but less patient. I answered. "Morning, Emma. You're going to love this," she said, her tone the polite kind of sarcasm reserved for family scandals. Aventra's HR just sent a company-wide memo. "Let me guess," I said. "Another diversity initiative with no diversity?" She laughed. "Worse. It's titled Productivity in a Multi-Generational Workforce. You might want to read it before breakfast." I opened my laptop, an old model, but efficient. Emma forwarded the memo and I scanned it line by line. The words leapt out in perfect corporate neutrality. Outdated skill sets, legacy staff fatigue, retirement age redundancies. By the second paragraph, Sophie's phrasing was unmistakable, her particular rhythm of cruelty disguised as efficiency. Then came the line that sealed it. Obsolete pensioners continue to drain productivity resources. Phase-out strategies should prioritize agility over tenure. I exhaled slowly, closing the document. My reflection in the screen was unreadable. "So she's mocking me," I said, "well on my payroll." Emma hesitated. "You're not going to—" "Oh, I'm going to," I said, but elegantly. She chuckled nervously. "Should I warn Dad?" "Tell him to keep his calendar open. I'll need him soon." When the call ended, I sat there for a long moment, hands folded, listening to the rain gutter off the roof. There was something almost comic in it. Her entire department funded by dividends she didn't know I approved. Her salary wired from accounts bearing my signature. I felt the laugh rise in me, quiet but certain. When I finally called Caleb, he answered with his usual morning calm. "Good morning, Ms. Langford," he teased. "Has the lioness hunted?" "She's circling," I said. "Apparently, my daughter-in-law has decided the company's elders are obsolete." Well, he said, that's quite poetic. Let's make it art. He laughed, knowing exactly what that meant. You're thinking of paying a visit. Not as mother or grandmother, I said, as shareholder. He was silent for a beat. You haven't used your maiden name in years. Then it'll be all the more effective. He sighed with admiration. You really could have gone into politics. I prefer industries that actually produce something, I said. Email the chairman. Tell him Ms. Margaret Hale, no, make that Ms. M. Hale, wants a brief audience regarding portfolio governance. Governance, he repeated. That'll open doors fast. It should, I said. I paid for most of them. He promised to handle the arrangements discreetly. I thanked him, then hung up and leaned back in my chair. The thrill of motion, of a plan leaving the shore, spread through me. I hadn't felt it in years. I walked to the study window where the rain had started again, softer this time, as if the city were whispering approval. I watched gulls wheel over the bay and thought about Sophie, probably tapping her manicured nails against some intern's desk, lecturing about efficiency. She had no idea that the ground beneath her cubicle was already shifting. I pulled the Aventra folder from the desk again, this time adding a new document on top. My original investment note, dated 19 years ago. The ink had faded, but the numbers still gleamed with precision. Every empire leaves breadcrumbs. You just have to know where you left them. As I filed the memo into the folder, I whispered to myself, audit accepted. The clock in the hallway chimed once, clean, decisive. I took that as a cue. In the distance, thunder rolled faintly over the sound, a low reminder that storms don't announce themselves. They gather quietly. I turned off the lamp, slipped the folder into my leather briefcase, and looked once more at the skyline across the water. Let's see how she handles a shareholder meeting, I murmured. And with that, I smiled, not out of malice, but recognition. The accountant had indeed awakened. By Wednesday, the city had shaken off the storm. The clouds lifted like stage curtains, revealing the sharp edges of glass towers slick with new light. I had almost forgotten how corporate mornings looked from this side of the river. Impatient people, eyes on phones, shoes clicking like synchronized clocks. I stood outside Aventra Systems headquarters, its mirrored facade stretching 20 stories into the sky. I could see myself reflected there. A small gray figure in a navy coat, pearls discreet, hair pinned into quiet precision. Understated, that was always the sharper blade. Inside, the lobby buzzed with energy, that caffeine-fueled optimism particular to people who think they own time. I approached the front desk, my briefcase balanced on one arm. "Good morning," the receptionist said, her smile professional, practiced. "Good morning," I replied. "I'm Ms. Hale. I have a 9 o'clock with Mr. Wexler." Her fingers flew across the keyboard. "Of course, Ms. Hale. He asked me to let you know he's looking forward to it." I nodded, taking a visitor badge she offered. It caught the light, glinting faintly, temporary access for someone who owned permanence. As the elevator doors closed, I caught a glimpse of the logo etched into the marble wall. Aventra Systems, innovating the future. I almost laughed. I had funded their past, yet here they were, mistaking their inheritance for innovation. The boardroom was on the 21st floor overlooking Elliott Bay. When the doors opened, the scent of roasted coffee and glass cleaner mingled with something colder, ambition. The receptionist outside the board suite stood. "Ms. Langford, the board will see you now." The name, Langford, rolled off her tongue, unfamiliar to her, but deliberate on mine. Caleb had made the adjustment just as I'd asked. The timing was perfect. As I stepped forward, I heard a familiar voice down the corridor. Sophie's, brisk and bright. She was mid-conversation, tablet in hand, issuing directions to a junior associate. She didn't see me at first, too immersed in the cadence of control. Make sure the department heads submit their reports before... Her voice stopped abruptly as I turned toward the open doorway. She blinked, processing, then frowned slightly as if my presence didn't make sense in her curated ecosystem. Maggie, what are you? Before she could finish, another door opened at the end of the hall. Mr. Wexler, the chairman, stepped out, his expression lighting up with genuine warmth. Ms. Langford, he said, extending his hand. It's an honor. We haven't seen you in years. The words hung in the hallway like dropped glass. Sophie froze mid-step. Her hand still held the tablet, but her fingers had stopped moving. I smiled, shaking his hand firmly. Good to see you too, Richard. I thought it was time I checked on one of my quieter investments. Wexler nodded eagerly. Of course, please, come in. We've been meaning to update you on some numbers. Numbers are my comfort zone, I said lightly, though I've been reading some interesting memos from your HR department. I let the words hang just long enough for Sophie to hear them. She stood rooted, her face paling as recognition dawned. Not the familial kind, but professional. The kind that rearranges a person's entire sense of hierarchy. Her mouth opened slightly, then closed again. Yes, I said, turning to her, my tone polite but precise. You must be the HR director, correct? I've read your memos. Her tablet wobbled in her grasp. You read. I do try to stay informed, I said, especially about cultural matters. The silence that followed had weight. Even the receptionist outside pretended to check emails that didn't exist. Wexler cleared his throat, ushering me toward the boardroom. Shall we, Mrs. Langford? I nodded, stepping past Sophie. She still hadn't moved. Her perfume, sharp citrus, expensive, clung to the air, the scent of someone accustomed to being the center of it. I caught it as I passed, a note of arrogance dissolving into uncertainty. Lovely to see family taking such an active role in the company, Wexler added absently. Sophie's eyes darted to him, then to me. Family? She echoed faintly. I turned at the doorway. Yes, I said softly. We keep it all. In-house. Her face drained of color. I offered a pleasant, practiced smile, the same one I'd used in mergers, audits, and every war disguised as business. Don't worry, I said. This is just a routine check-in. Then I stepped into the boardroom, the glass doors whispering closed behind me, sealing her outside with the echo of her own laughter from days ago. The boardroom was colder than I remembered. They always are. Power doesn't like warmth. It prefers polish and air conditioning. The glass walls framed the bay beyond, a postcard of calm that had nothing to do with the room's atmosphere. Wexler gestured for me to sit at the long table. Can I get you something? Coffee? Tea? Tea, thank you, I said, settling my briefcase beside me. Black. He chuckled, unaware of the private irony. Of course. The board members filed in. 6 men, 2 women, all younger than me, most unaware that their careers had once fit inside my ledger. The CFO, a meticulous man named Glenn, spread quarterly binders across the table like a dealer setting a deck. Let's get started, Wexler said, adjusting his glasses. Ms. Langford, we're honored you could join us. It's been too long since you've graced us with your presence. Presence is overrated, I said lightly, opening the folder Caleb had prepped for me. Ownership, however, that's timeless. That earned a polite laugh, but Glenn's brow furrowed. Forgive me, Ms. Langford, are you referring to your legacy investment through Hale Capital? Not legacy, I corrected. Active. 35% last I checked. The room went still. Even the hum of the HVAC seemed to pause. I slid the document across the table. The reaffirmation of my ownership stake, recently notarized. Glenn picked it up, scanned it once, and turned pale. Ms. Langford, he said slowly, this gives you majority voting rights in the event of leadership review. Yes, I said. That's what it says. Wexler blinked, recovering quickly with the kind of grace only executives with golden parachutes develop. Remarkable. We hadn't realized Hale Capital still held its equity under your direct authority. Most people don't realize what they owe until an audit, I replied. He smiled nervously. Of course. Well, perhaps you'd like to review the quarterlies? I would. He gestured to Glenn, who began reciting numbers. Revenue growth, retention dips, budget reallocations. I let him drone on until he reached HR expenditures. That's when I raised a hand. Stop there, I said. Could you clarify the phase-out strategies line item? Glenn looked confused. That would fall under HR directives. Cost efficiency measures, I believe. Cost efficiency, I repeated. Curious term. I read something similar in one of your memos recently. I didn't have to turn to know Sophie had entered the room. I could feel her presence, the sharp scent of anxiety barely masked by perfume. She stood near the door, tablet clutched like a shield. Ms. Langford, Wexler said, glancing between us. Our HR director just joined. Perhaps she can elaborate. Sophie swallowed hard. Yes, of course. Her voice trembled, then steadied into performance mode. The memo simply outlines generational optimization, aligning staffing with innovation cycles. Meaning? I asked. She hesitated. Phasing out redundant senior roles. Redundant, I repeated softly, letting the words settle like dust on glass. Experience, in your view, equates to redundancy. It's about agility, she said, color rising to her cheeks. Agility is admirable, I said. So is memory. One prevents mistakes. The other repeats them. The CFO coughed into his hand. Wexler shifted, clearly regretting every memo he'd ignored. Your HR culture, I said, turning my attention to the table, seems dismissive of experience. That's concerning in a company founded by people who built it from nothing but sleepless nights and second mortgages. No one spoke. Sophie's fingers twitched at her tablet. Wexler cleared his throat. Will, of course, review leadership immediately. I smiled. Please do. I'm sure your director will handle it gracefully. I met Sophie's eyes as I said it. Her face had gone completely white. She nodded stiffly, mumbling something about a prior meeting. Wexler waved her off absently, already murmuring to Glenn about bylaws and optics. Sophie turned toward the door, moving carefully, as though sudden motion might shatter what was left of her illusion. Ms. Langford, she whispered before leaving, why didn't you ever tell us? Because, my dear, I said quietly, entitlement can't be taught. It has to be revealed. The door closed behind her with a soft click. I gathered my papers, taking a slow sip of tea. It was perfectly brewed, hot, dark, without sweetness. Across the table, Wexler exhaled. Well, he said, trying for levity, that was enlightening. Yes, I said. Sunlight is the best disinfectant. Outside the glass wall, the sky over Elliott Bay darkened again, clouds folding back in like an omen that hadn't finished speaking. I looked at my reflection in the window. The calm expression, the quiet power reclaimed, and felt the shift in the air. The storm hadn't passed. It had just changed hands. By evening, the city had gone back to pretending. Streetlights shimmered on the wet pavement, restaurant windows glowed with curated laughter, and Seattle exhaled as if the morning's tremors had never happened. But beneath every calm surface, I've learned, there's a current. Ethan's house looked immaculate from the curb, warm light through expensive glass, the hum of a new Tesla charging in the driveway. I stood at the door for a moment before knocking, smoothing my coat though it didn't need it. Sophie opened the door. Her lipstick was perfect, but her eyes gave her away. Edges frayed, the careful veneer stretched thin. "Mom," she said too brightly, "you made it. Dinner's almost ready." The scent of rosemary and roasted chicken filled the air. Domestic harmony, staged with precision. Ethan appeared behind her, all charm and casual confidence. "Hey, Mom, big day shopping?" I hung my coat on the rack and smiled. "Actually, I stopped by your office." For a split second, no one breathed. Sophie's hand jerked. The serving spoon clattered against the counter. Ethan frowned. "Our office?" "Yes," I said, slipping into my seat at the table. "Aventra Systems. Lovely view from the 21st floor." Sophie turned sharply, her fork scraping the plate. "You didn't—" she started, voice a whisper. I did. I poured myself water from the crystal pitcher. "I met Mr. Wexler and your CFO. Very polite men." Ethan blinked, confusion flickering. "Wait, why were you meeting them?" Sophie's eyes shot to me, pleading, warning. "Mom," she said, strained. "You didn't tell him who—" I met her gaze evenly. "Who you work for." Her fork slipped from her hand, hitting the table with a dull clang. Silence spread like a stain. Ethan looked between us. "What's going on?" No one answered. Sophie's breath came shallow. I could almost hear her heartbeat trying to outrun the truth. I took my time slicing into the chicken, the silver knife sliding easily through the skin. "Your wife," I said finally, "works for a company I happen to own a rather significant portion of." Ethan laughed. Too quickly, a defense mechanism. "You're kidding." "She's not," Sophie muttered, her eyes fixed on her plate. "Since when?" he demanded. "Since before you two met," I said. "Before Aventra was a logo, when it was still a dream in a rented basement." Ethan leaned back in his chair, staring at me. "You could have told us." "I could have," I said calmly. "But entitlement's an unreliable foundation for gratitude." Sophie stood abruptly, her chair scraping. "You humiliated me," she snapped. "You walked into my boardroom and—" "I attended a meeting," I said, cutting her off. "If humiliation occurred, that's a byproduct of conduct, not attendance." "Don't do this," Ethan said sharply, voice rising. "Not here, not tonight." "Why not?" I asked softly. "Truth doesn't care about the setting." The tension coiled tight around the table. Lucy's footsteps padded softly down the stairs. She peeked around the corner in her pajamas, holding a stuffed fox. "Daddy? Why are you shouting?" Ethan's shoulders dropped. "Go back upstairs, sweetie. We're just talking." She looked at me, eyes wide. "You okay, Grandma?" "I'm fine, sweetheart," I said gently. "Grown-ups are just learning some math." Sophie let out a bitter laugh. "Oh, is that what this is? A lesson?" "Maybe," I said. "Or an audit." Ethan rubbed his forehead. "You always have to control everything, don't you? Even dinner." "I control what I build," I said quietly. "And I built this company. I built the safety net you both walk on." Sophie folded her arms. "And now you're cutting it out from under us." I studied her. Every tremor, every defense crumbling under the weight of discovery. "No," I said finally. "I'm reminding you it was never yours." For a moment, no one spoke. The rain started again outside, tapping against the window like a clock marking endings. Ethan looked down at his plate, untouched. "What happens now?" he asked, voice small. I stood, collecting my purse from the back of the chair. "That depends," I said, glancing at Sophie, "on how your HR director handles accountability." She flinched but didn't reply. As I reached the door, I heard Ethan whisper something to her. Something tight, panicked, half blame and half disbelief. I stepped into the cool night air. The scent of wet cedar and distant salt filled my lungs, grounding me. Through the dining room window, their silhouettes were still frozen around the table. Two people suddenly aware of the ground beneath them shifting. The drizzle caught in my hair as I whispered to no one. Audits always start with dinner. The next evening came heavy with the kind of silence that follows detonation. Even the rain seemed cautious, brushing against the windows instead of pounding. I wasn't surprised when the phone rang. It was Ethan, his voice tight, polite in the way people are when they're already angry. "Dinner, 8 o'clock. Just us." Just us. Which meant he wanted a confrontation without witnesses. When I arrived, the table was smaller this time. No place settings for Lucy, no pretense of family warmth. The air smelled faintly of scotch and resentment. Ethan sat at the head of the table, sleeves rolled up, jaw set. Sophie stood near the window, arms crossed, her reflection fractured by rain against the glass. "Mom," Ethan said evenly, "sit." I did quietly, folding my hands on the table. He didn't waste time. "Sophie tells me you're a major shareholder." The pause before the word was almost comical. "Yes," I said. 35%. He laughed once, sharp. "So what? You're her boss's boss?" Sophie turned from the window, voice brittle. "Exactly that." Ethan looked between us, the pieces sliding into place. "Since when?" "Since before you two met," I said. He leaned back, exhaling hard. "You've been sitting on that this whole time? Watching us work like strangers?" "I wasn't watching," I said. "I was trusting." Sophie scoffed. "Trusting? You humiliated me, Maggie. You walked into my office like some corporate assassin." I tilted my head slightly. "No, Sophie. You humiliated yourself. At brunch, remember? You laughed at a pension. You mocked the hands that fund your salary." Her cheeks flushed crimson. "That wasn't about you." "Of course it was." I met her eyes. "It always is, when contempt is generational." Ethan slammed his glass onto the table, scotch spilling over his hand. "You could have told us." "And ruin the surprise?" I said softly. He stared at me, disbelief giving way to anger. "You make everything a test. Every kindness has fine print." "That's not true," I said, keeping my voice level. "You just don't read the terms." Sophie turned on him suddenly. "You're defending her?" "I'm trying to understand," he snapped. "She's been hiding a fortune while we've been building your own," I interrupted. "And I never stopped you." "But arrogance, Ethan, is a poor business partner." He pushed back from the table, pacing. "So what's the end game here? You want control? Validation? What?" I took a slow sip of water before answering. "Clarity. Clarity." He barked a laugh. "You're unbelievable." Sophie's voice cut through the room, low and shaking. "Do you have any idea what you did to me today? People looked at me differently, like I was an idiot who didn't even know who signed her checks." I sighed. "You're not an idiot, Sophie. You're intelligent ambitious and, unfortunately, reckless with both. That's condescension. It's truth. She moved closer, eyes blazing. You think this makes you powerful? Owning things in secret? Pulling strings while pretending to sip tea on your porch? No, I said quietly. Power isn't ownership, it's restraint. And I've shown you both far too much of it. The words landed like a slow echo. Ethan stared at me, his anger starting to blur into something else. Realization, maybe. So what happens now? He asked again, softer this time. That depends, I said, on whether you both can tell the difference between legacy and leverage. Sophie's lip trembled. You just wanted to humiliate me. I wanted you to see the structure you stand on, I said. You thought you built it. You didn't. You just decorated it. Her eyes filled, but she turned away before a tear could fall. You've made your point. No, I said, standing slowly. I've made my entrance. Ethan shook his head, bitter smile twisting his mouth. You always know how to burn down a room, don't you? Only when it's full of rot, I said, collecting my coat. I walked toward the door, pausing as the thunder rolled outside. Behind me, their voices overlapped. Anger, confusion, the kind of friction that breaks rather than bonds. Mom, Ethan called. I turned slightly. What are you going to do next? I looked at him, the answer already formed before I spoke. Exactly what I've always done, I said. Balance the books. Then I stepped out into the rain, steady, deliberate, cleansing. Inside, through the window, their silhouettes stood apart now. Two separate storms beginning to form. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel the need to go back inside. The next week, the whispers began. I'd almost admire the efficiency of it if the intent weren't so predictable. Tech offices thrive on rumor the way old factories thrived on smoke. It seeps into everything. Emma called first. You'll want to hear this, she said, her voice tight with restrained irritation. Your daughter-in-law's been very busy. How busy? I asked, looking out over the bay. Morning mist hugged the water, gray on gray, the color of discretion. She's been hinting you're meddling with HR, that you used your position to embarrass her in front of the board. I smiled faintly. That's half true. I didn't embarrass her. I simply illuminated the room. Emma exhaled. She's talking to people she shouldn't. CFO. Even legal counsel. Framing you as some kind of corporate dinosaur trying to claw back relevance. Ah, I said. Projection. The first language of insecurity. Dad says you should document everything, she added. I always do, I replied. I hung up and stared at the fog rolling in. Sophie had always been quick, reactive, impatient, and now cornered. I could almost picture her striding through that sterile HR floor, heels striking tile, gathering allies from the same people who'd laughed at her jokes 2 weeks ago. Fear dresses itself as leadership when it needs to. Later that day, Caleb called. His voice, as ever, was the calm after a storm. You know, he said, there's a clean solution to this. I'm listening. You can fire her. Legally, with cause. She's spreading falsehoods that undermine governance. It's textbook. I considered that. The pragmatic part of me liked the symmetry. Action, consequence, closure. But it was too neat, too forgettable. Too simple, I said finally. Simple is efficient. Efficient doesn't teach, I replied. He chuckled softly. And what do you propose, Professor? Transformation, I said. Overtermination. He was quiet for a moment, then sighed. You've already drafted something, haven't you? Nearly. I looked down at the open document on my laptop. an initiative titled Legacy Mentorship Program, integrating generational excellence, the kind of policy HR departments love to boast about, but rarely understood. This, I said, will require HR to identify and mentor senior employees, pairing older staff with mid-level managers, every department, including hers. Caleb's low whistle came through the line. You're assigning her humility. I'm giving her an opportunity for it, I corrected. Whether she takes it is her KPI, not my concern. He laughed quietly. God help anyone who underestimates you. God already did, I said. Now I'm just finishing the audit. After hanging up, I read over the draft again. The language was flawless, progressive, measurable, humane. No one could oppose it without appearing ageist or short-sighted. Sophie would have to smile through it at the next leadership meeting, pretending to champion an idea that publicly contradicted her private memo. By the end of the week, the initiative was circulating through corporate channels, bearing my electronic signature. I waited. 2 days later, Emma texted me. She got the memo. You'd have loved the expression. I replied with a single line. Document transformation. That evening, as the sky bruised over the Sound, I allowed myself a small glass of red wine and reread the press release draft Aventra's communications team had prepared. The headline read, Aventra launches mentorship initiative to celebrate experienced workforce. I could almost hear Sophie's voice reading that aloud in the office, forced smile in place, her colleagues clapping politely. Optics mattered more than truth in her world. I was simply adjusting the optics. I called Caleb again before bed. It's done, I said. You realize she'll see this as a declaration of war. Then she's learning vocabulary, I said. He chuckled. You really don't want her gone? Gone? I mused. No, I want her changed. And change hurts longer than unemployment. The rain began again outside, tapping rhythmically on the windows, an old accountant's metronome. As I closed my laptop, I caught my reflection in the dark glass, composed, deliberate, faintly amused. She wanted a power game, I murmured. Let's see if she knows the rules. And then, softly to myself, almost a benediction, let's see how she mentors humility. By late spring, the company had turned strangely polite. Emails came with extra greetings, meetings started on time, and no one raised their voice above a certain register. It was the kind of quiet that meant something was rotting beneath the floorboards. I didn't have to dig far to know what it was. Caleb called one morning, his voice carrying that mix of restraint and excitement he reserved for professional storms. We've got a situation, he said. Internal audit just wrapped preliminary findings. Go on. Misallocated budgets, missing receipts, HR expense accounts that don't add up. Guess whose name's on the sign-off line? I didn't answer. I didn't have to. He continued. They're scheduling a full review. Standard procedure would let you override it. Quietly bury it before it hits the board. No, I said. It goes through the process. He paused. You're sure? It'll get public. HR means optics. This could tank her. I'm not destroying anyone, Caleb, I said. I'm revealing them. The next day, the board circulated the memo. Internal Audit, Phase 2. HR and Budgetary Compliance Review. It was formal, bloodless, and signed by Emma Frost, audit lead. Emma had inherited her father's calm precision, but carried my appetite for truth. I hadn't asked her to lead the review, but the symmetry wasn't lost on me. By Thursday, whispers filled Aventra's hallways. Sophie's office door stayed closed, her assistant suddenly working remote. People notice things faster when fear is nearby. At home, the silence between her and Ethan had grown visible. something you could almost trip over. When he finally showed up at my house, he looked exhausted, jaw tight, tie askew. "Mom," he said, not sitting. "They're saying Sophie's department is under investigation." I set my tea down carefully. "It is." He stared at me, incredulous. "And you're just—" "What? Letting it happen?" "I'm following procedure." "She's terrified." "She should be." "Mom," his voice cracked. "She made mistakes, okay? Everyone does, but you—" "I'm not punishing her," I said quietly. "I'm auditing her. There's a difference." He ran a hand through his hair, pacing the length of the rug. "Do you even hear yourself? You sound like—" He stopped. "Like a CEO." "I sound like someone who built the scaffolding you both live on," I said. "And I'm tired of watching people hang curtains and call it architecture." He sank into the chair opposite me, face in his hands. "Please don't destroy her." I studied him. My son, middle-aged now but still the boy who thought fairness and mercy were the same thing. "Ethan," I said, "some people only understand mercy when it's the last thing they can't negotiate." He looked up, eyes glassy. "You really don't forgive, do you?" "I forgive," I said. "I just don't erase." He left without saying goodbye. I watched from the window as his car disappeared down the wet street, his brake lights vanishing like retreating embers. 2 days later, the inevitable email arrived. HR Director Sophie Langford, administrative leave pending investigation. The message was terse, procedural, signed by the acting chief operating officer. Emma called an hour later. "It's clean," she said. "We found patterns. Vendor kickbacks, falsified reimbursements. Not criminal, but unethical." She signed them all. "Do it by the book," I said. "No leaks from us." "There already are," she said softly. "Someone in finance is talking. The story's out." By evening, social feeds carried the headline, "Aventra's HR director under internal audit scrutiny. Nothing salacious, just enough to bruise a reputation." I poured myself a small whiskey, letting the burn settle in my chest. The rain had stopped outside, but the wind still carried a chill. The phone buzzed again. "Ethan." I almost didn't answer. "Mom," he said, voice breaking. "They've suspended her. She's devastated. Please just do something." "I already did," I said. "What the hell does that mean?" "It means I gave her the dignity of process. The rest is on her signature." He went silent. Then, "I don't even recognize you anymore." "You never tried to," I said, and ended the call. The house fell into stillness. Across the bay, the city lights flickered like warning beacons reflected in the water. I walked to my desk, opened the audit summary, and read the closing line Emma had written. "All findings verified. Awaiting final recommendation." For a long moment, I let the words rest under my fingertips. When I finally spoke, it was to the window, my own reflection faint against the night. "Public embarrassment," I murmured. "A fair exchange rate for private arrogance." The wind pressed against the glass, low and steady, like the sea agreeing. And somewhere downtown, in a corner office that wasn't hers anymore, I imagined Sophie staring at her darkened computer screen, realizing for the first time that silence can be louder than revenge. Scandal moves faster than truth. By the following Monday, Aventra's hallways had turned colder, not from policy, but from silence. People passed Sophie without meeting her eyes. Conversations stopped mid-sentence when she entered the elevator. In the company cafeteria, chairs subtly shifted to other tables. Seattle's polite cruelty always preferred whispers over confrontation. I didn't see her that week, but I didn't have to. The city carried rumors like fog, soft, constant, impossible to escape. It was Ethan who showed up first, unannounced, standing on my porch with his coat half buttoned and rain still on his face. He looked thinner, older somehow, as though the last month had aged him a year. "Can I come in?" he asked. I stepped aside. "You usually don't ask." He didn't smile. Inside, he stood by the fireplace without sitting, hands jammed into his pockets like he was trying to keep himself from shattering. "You've seen the news," he said. "I've seen it," I replied. "It's efficient." His eyes flashed. "Efficient? Jesus, Mom. Her career's ruined. People she mentored won't even take her calls. You did this." I took a breath. "I didn't falsify budgets, Ethan. I didn't spend company funds on retreats labeled as executive coaching. I didn't send memos about phasing out older workers." "You could have stopped it before it got public," he said, his voice cracking. "You could have protected her." "I gave her choices," I said evenly, "not consequences." He shook his head, pacing. "You've always had to win, haven't you? Even when there's nothing left to prove." "No," I said quietly. "I've just never tolerated cruelty dressed as class." That stopped him. For a moment, the anger drained, leaving something raw. Disappointment, maybe. Or grief. He turned toward the rain-streaked window, staring at nothing. "She's not sleeping," he said after a long pause. "She won't eat. Her friends are gone. People think she—" He stopped himself. "They think you made an example of her." I looked at the fire, the small crackle of burning cedar. Perhaps they're half right. Examples have more reach than apologies. He exhaled hard. "You don't even sound human when you talk like that." "I sound honest," I said. "There's a difference." He turned to face me. "Do you even care that she's suffering?" "Of course I care," I said. "I just don't confuse compassion with correction." For a second, he almost laughed, one of those hollow, tired laughs that end in a sigh. "You always have a phrase ready, don't you? A line, a metaphor. I don't know how Dad lived with it." "Your father understood balance," I said softly. "You call it control because you only ever saw the top of the ledger, never the cost." He looked at me like he was searching for the mother he'd lost somewhere between childhood and this moment. "You know what people at the firm call you now?" "I can imagine. The Iron Widow." I almost smiled. "Catchy. I'll send their marketing team a note." He shook his head, defeated, and walked toward the door. Before he opened it, he turned back once more. "You don't have to be right all the time, Mom." "I'm not," I said. "I'm just consistent." He left without another word. The door clicked shut, and the quiet that followed wasn't peace. It was aftermath. From upstairs, I heard light footsteps, smaller, hesitant. Lucy stood halfway down the staircase in her socks, holding a sketchbook to her chest. "Dad's mad?" she said. "Yes," I said gently. "He's allowed to be." She came closer, her hair messy from sleep. "Is it because of Grandma's work thing?" "Something like that." She frowned, thinking hard the way only 12-year-olds can. "You're not mean, Grandma," she said finally. "You're just awake." The words stopped me cold. I knelt to her level, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "That's a very smart thing to say." She shrugged. "I listen." I smiled faintly. "Smart girl." Outside, the wind picked up again, bending the trees near the bluff. I could hear the sound against the rocks. Steady, relentless, unchanged. And for the first time in weeks, I let myself sit by the fire until it burned low, wondering if awakening others always meant standing in their resentment's light. Caleb's office still smelled of paper and pipe tobacco, even though he hadn't lit one in years. The blinds were half closed. slicing the Seattle light into neat gray stripes across the rug. I was standing by the window when I heard the door open behind me. "Maggie," he said, "you have a visitor." I turned as Ethan stepped inside. His expression was a strange mix of exhaustion and fight, the look of a man determined to win an argument he didn't understand. "Mom," he said stiffly, then turned to Caleb. "Can I talk to you alone?" Caleb looked at me, a silent question. I nodded and picked up my briefcase. "I'll wait outside," I said, but I didn't leave. Instead, I paused just outside the door, where their voices carried through the frosted glass. Years in corporate life had taught me that people tell the truth only when they think you can't hear them. Ethan started. "She's out of control. You have to talk to her." Caleb's voice was steady, patient. "She's within her rights, Ethan, and her wisdom." "Wisdom?" Ethan snapped. "She's tearing my marriage apart. Sophie can't even go to the grocery store without someone whispering about her. My daughter asks why her mother doesn't smile anymore." There was a pause, the sound of Caleb pouring something. Coffee, probably. "Then your foundation wasn't strong," he said quietly. "Don't give me parables, Caleb," Ethan said. "You've known her longer than anyone. You can reason with her." "I've tried," Caleb said. "Reason doesn't change principle. Your mother isn't acting out of vengeance." "That's exactly what this is," Ethan said, his voice breaking. "Vengeance dressed as virtue." "She could have destroyed Sophie," Caleb said. "Instead, she's forcing her to rebuild. That's not vengeance. That's mentorship. The hard kind." There was silence. Then I heard the scrape of Ethan's chair. "I can't do this anymore," he said finally. "Every day feels like choosing between my wife and my mother." Caleb's answer came after a long pause. "Then stop choosing. Start listening." The door opened suddenly, and Ethan nearly collided with me. His eyes flashed. "Were you listening?" "Yes," I said. And I heard a man blaming me for cracks he built himself. He shook his head, brushed past me, and left without another word. The door closed hard behind him, rattling the glass. Caleb raised an eyebrow. "You really should install thicker walls." "Wouldn't help," I said, setting my briefcase back down. "He's been deaf for years." Caleb sighed. "He's hurting." "So is she," I said. "Pain isn't a competition, it's data." He smiled faintly. "You always did quantify emotions." "Only when they interfere with logic." He leaned back. "So what now?" "I wait," I said. "People reveal themselves under pressure." That same afternoon, my phone buzzed. A terse email from Sophie's personal account. Subject: resignation. I opened it. 3 short lines. Effective immediately. Please accept my resignation from Aventra Systems. Consider it mercy. For both of us. I called her immediately. She answered after the 3rd ring, voice brittle. "Don't bother trying to talk me out of it." "I'm not," I said. "I'm blocking it." "You can't." "I already did." There was a stunned silence. "You want me to suffer," she said finally. "No," I said. "I want you to evolve." Her breath caught, half laugh, half sob. "You don't get to define my growth." "I don't," I said. "But I'm giving you a chance to find it before the world defines it for you." "You're unbelievable." "I've been called worse." She hung up without another word. I sat there for a moment, listening to the faint click of disconnection, then forwarded her email to Emma with one line: "Resignation not accepted. Reinstate under mentorship clause." Caleb called that evening. "You could have let her go, Maggie. You really could have." "I could have," I said. "But lessons dissolve when they end too soon." Outside, twilight settled over the sound, the water dark and still as glass. Somewhere in the distance, I could hear church bells marking the hour, steady, relentless, almost merciful. I thought of Sophie then, trapped between guilt and defiance, and of Ethan, angry but loyal in the wrong direction. And I whispered to the window, "Mercy's the longest math of all." Autumn came early that year, the kind that doesn't announce itself so much as quietly take over. Fog settling lower, light turning amber, time moving differently. The city looked washed of arrogance. Even Aventra's glass tower seemed smaller against the gray sky. Emma kept me updated from inside. "She's doing the work," she said one afternoon. "The mentorship sessions, the workshops. She shows up early. She listens." "Listening is the beginning of wisdom," I said. "Or survival," Emma replied. Either way, Sophie was quiet now. The scandal had drained her of the sharp edges she once weaponized. I imagined her walking through those same hallways where she'd once commanded glances, now receiving only silence. It's a strange kind of penance, being invisible. Weeks passed, and the mentorship program that began as my test began taking on a life of its own. The older employees, the so-called legacy staff Sophie once mocked, were thriving under it. Productivity ticked up. Morale lifted. For the first time, the company looked balanced. Then Emma called again. "You'll like this," she said. Sophie requested an extra round of interviews with the older staff, off the record. "Voluntary or penance?" I asked. "Maybe both." I smiled faintly. "Progress either way." I didn't attend the sessions myself, but Emma sent me notes. Sophie had sat with employees from every department: maintenance, finance, design. She asked them what kept them working here all these years. Most gave simple answers: stability, habit, pride. But one name kept appearing in their stories: mine. A week later, Emma sent me an audio clip from one of the mentorship sessions, recorded with consent. The voice was rough, male, older. "That Langford woman," he said. "She saved our jobs once, you know." There was a pause before Sophie asked, hesitantly, "Which one?" He chuckled softly. "The one who built this place. Your boss's boss." On the recording, I heard nothing for several seconds. Then the faintest sound, a breath catching. Sophie's. That evening, I couldn't stop thinking about it. Words I'd meant as lesson had turned into legend without my help, carried in the voices of people who'd actually built the things she'd thought she owned. A few days later, I saw her. By chance. Or maybe not. She was leaving the office just as I was arriving for a late meeting with the board. She didn't see me at first. The once unshakable stride was slower now, smaller. She clutched her tote close to her side, hair unstyled, face bare. The look of someone stripped to what's real. I almost called out, but something held me back. Instead, I watched as she reached her car, slid into the driver's seat, and sat there. For a long time. The city kept moving around her, traffic lights changing, pedestrians crossing, but she didn't start the engine. Her head lowered, hands gripping the steering wheel. And then I saw her shoulders shake. The fogged window hid her face, but I didn't need to see it to know. The silence between us stretched across the parking lot, thick as the autumn mist. I stood there longer than I should have, half turned toward the building. A younger version of me would have walked away without pause, counting the equation complete. But age softens even the accountant's arithmetic. I walked to my car instead, but before getting in, I looked once more at hers. She was still there, still crying quietly, alone. For a moment, I imagined walking over, tapping the window, telling her she'd finally done something worth respecting. But pride and compassion rarely coexist comfortably, and I wasn't sure which one of us needed protecting more. That night, back at the house, I stood at the window overlooking the water. The lights from the city shimmered like ledger lines across the sound. Somewhere out there, Sophie was learning the language of consequence, and maybe, for the first time, empathy. Caleb's voice came back to me, years old but perfectly timed. You built empires while they built resumes. Maybe now, I thought, she was beginning to understand the difference. I closed the curtains slowly, leaving the city outside to its own reflection. And in the dark glass, my face stared back. Steady, older, but not untouched. Transformation, I whispered. Always the longer math. The first frost came early that year, frosting the edges of the bay like silver handwriting. From my window, the city looked brittle, suspended between seasons, much like the people in it. Caleb arrived just after dawn, coat dusted with rain, briefcase in hand. He set it on my kitchen table and poured himself coffee without asking. He'd earned the right. "You're sure about this?" he asked, flipping open the file. "I've been sure for months," I said. "It just needed formality." He adjusted his glasses, scanning the documents. Langford Family Foundation, revised beneficiary structure. You've named Lucy as the sole heir to your Aventra holdings, effective immediately. Correct. He looked up, eyebrows raised. That's the majority of your estate, Maggie. Yes, you're skipping an entire generation. Intentionally, I said. He sat back, studying me. You realize what that'll do to Ethan? I do, I said softly. It'll force him to stop orbiting wealth he didn't earn. Caleb sighed, leaning back in his chair. You really do play the long game. I'm an accountant, I said. We always balance eventually. He smiled faintly. I'll file this today. When he left, I lingered at the table, running my fingers over the embossed paper. The ink was barely dry, yet the decision already felt ancient, inevitable. By evening, Ethan and Sophie showed up unannounced. Their car lights cut across the driveway like interrogation beams. I met them at the door before they could knock. We need to talk, Ethan said. His tone wasn't angry this time, just heavy, like a man walking uphill too long. Come in, I said. They didn't sit. Sophie's face was drawn, calmer than I'd ever seen it. The fight had left her, replaced by something quieter. Ethan held a folder in his hand, Caleb's signature visible through the paper. I just got this from him, he said. Is it true? Yes. You transferred everything. To Lucy? Not everything, I said. Just what mattered. He stared at me, eyes wide. You skipped us entirely? I met his gaze without flinching. You got what you earned. A lesson. His voice cracked. That's cruel. No, I said. That's accountability with interest. Sophie finally spoke. Her voice was thin but steady. He's right, Maggie. You've made your point. You've won. This isn't about winning, I said. It's about ending the inheritance of arrogance. Ethan rubbed his face, pacing the floor. So Lucy gets everything. She's 12, for God's sake. She'll be guided, I said, by Caleb, by Emma, by the foundation. She'll inherit structure before she ever touches a dollar. That's how empires last. He stopped pacing. You sound proud of freezing your own son out. I'm proud, I said quietly, of choosing someone who hasn't forgotten how to learn. For a long moment, no one spoke. The clock in the hallway ticked, a sound like punctuation. Sophie stepped forward then, slowly, as if approaching something fragile. Maggie, she said, her voice trembling. You were right, I was cruel. I looked at her, not the version that glittered through cocktail parties or HR briefings, but the woman stripped bare by consequence. No, I said gently. You were uninformed. Now you're educated. She let out a shaky breath that was almost a laugh. That's one word for it. Growth always is, I said. We stood there in the quiet, the three of us, each a different kind of exhausted. Ethan looked between us, searching for some argument that hadn't already collapsed, but none came. Finally, Sophie extended her hand. I can't undo what I did, she said, but I can do better. I took it. Her palm was cold but steady. That's all evolution asks. We didn't embrace. We didn't apologize. We simply understood. Ethan exhaled, defeated, relieved, unsure. So that's it? You're just done? I'm just finished, I said. Outside, the frost had begun to melt, the bay reflecting a pale light that promised morning. Sophie turned toward the window, her reflection blending with mine in the glass. Two women finally standing on equal ground. Lucy's lucky, she whispered. No, I said softly. Lucy's the audit. Her lips parted, but she didn't reply. Ethan looked at me one last time, eyes full of questions I'd already answered. As they walked to the car, I watched through the window. The headlights disappeared down the wet road, leaving only the quiet pulse of the bay and the faint smell of cedar in the air. When I turned back to the table, the trust papers were still there. Signed, sealed, absolute. I placed my hand on them once, a gesture of both closure and release. Then, almost without realizing, I whispered to the empty room, balance achieved. By spring, Seattle thawed. The air smelled faintly of salt and cedar, and the fairies looked less like ghosts and more like promises. Change had finally settled. Not loud, not dramatic, just steady, like a ledger quietly closing itself. It was Emma who called first. You might want to check your inbox, she said, a smile audible in her voice. What am I looking for? A press release. I opened my laptop, half expecting another headline about market swings or mergers. Instead, the Aventra logo appeared, followed by a headline that made me still. Aventra Systems announces new Director of Inclusion, Sophie Langford. I read the statement twice. The words were polished, corporate, but sincere. Langford has demonstrated exceptional leadership in rebuilding cross-generational collaboration and cultural reform. A promotion, not a mercy. Earned, not inherited. Director of Inclusion, I murmured. Irony has a sense of humor after all. Emma laughed softly. She's hosting her first event next week, a company summit honoring women who built the industry. Guess who she asked to headline it? Let me guess, I said. Some retired accountant who won't stay retired? Something like that, Emma said. She used the words mentor and inspiration. I smiled, feeling the weight of the irony and the grace of it both. Send me the invite. The event was held at the same tower where she'd once mocked my pension. Only now, the marble floors didn't echo with arrogance. They hummed with something warmer. Inclusion banners lined the lobby. Employees moved with ease, not fear. There was laughter that sounded genuine. When I arrived, Sophie was already on stage, speaking into a sleek headset mic. Her voice carried confidence, but also humility, the kind that comes from surviving yourself. Experience isn't obsolete, she was saying. It's our competitive edge. The people who built this company deserve not just acknowledgement, but gratitude. Applause filled the room, polite at first, then growing. She smiled, composed, and continued. Today, we honor the women who laid the groundwork we stand on. including the one whose quiet wisdom still pays our salaries. I felt the room shift as my name appeared on the projection screen behind her. Margaret Langford, founding partner, Aventra Systems. Sophie turned toward the audience. Please welcome her home. I walked to the stage, the lights softer than I expected. The applause, real. Sophie stepped aside, offering me the microphone. Her hands were steady, her smile unforced. Thank you, I said, waiting for the room to quiet. I was told accountants aren't usually invited to parties, but I suppose exceptions can be audited. Laughter rippled through the crowd. Even Sophie laughed, freely this time. I looked out at the faces, young, old, every age in between. When I helped fund this company, I thought the greatest challenge would be growth. Turns out, it was humility. Success has a way of making people forget the foundation under their feet. But that foundation doesn't disappear. It waits. And sometimes, it even forgives. As I stepped back, the applause rose again, long and full. I saw Ethan in the front row, hands clasped, expression quiet but proud. The bitterness had drained out of him, replaced by something resembling peace. Sophie turned and met my eyes, and for the first time since the brunch, I saw no pretense there, only understanding. Then I felt a tug at my hand. Lucy stood beside me, eyes bright. "Grandma," she whispered, barely audible over the clapping. "Everyone knows now." I smiled. "Yes, dear," I said softly. And no one laughed. The applause swelled, but I barely heard it. I was watching Sophie instead. Her expression, the way she exhaled like someone finally free of armor. She stepped forward, offering her hand again, and this time, I took it without hesitation. It wasn't forgiveness, it was continuity. Later, as the crowd mingled and cameras flashed, I slipped to the edge of the room. Through the glass walls, the city shimmered under a rare, cloudless sky. The building I'd once built in silence now sang with voices of gratitude. Legacy had finally found its balance sheet. And for the first time in years, I felt something close to rest. The sound was calm that morning, gray light trembling over the water, gulls tracing slow circles above the docks. The city behind me was waking up, but here on the porch, time moved differently. My teacup sat cooling beside an untouched newspaper. I heard the crunch of tires on gravel before I saw the car. Then footsteps on the wooden path, measured, hesitant. When she appeared at the edge of the porch, I almost didn't recognize her. Sophie. Simpler clothes, no armor made of jewelry or silk, just a woman carrying 2 cups of coffee, steam curling like white flags between us. She smiled tentatively. "Double-shot cappuccino," she said, holding one out. "Thought you could afford one now." I let out a soft laugh, shaking my head. "Still black for me." "Of course," she said, setting the cappuccino on the railing beside me. "You always did like things unflavored." I motioned for her to sit. She hesitated, then took the chair across from mine. The same seat Caleb once occupied during 100 long discussions about ethics and empires. The same chair where Ethan had once stood shouting. History has a way of circling its own furniture. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The only sound was the slow lap of water against the pilings. She stared out toward the bay, hands wrapped around her cup like she needed the warmth more than the caffeine. "You've got quite the event calendar these days," I said. "The mentorship program, the inclusion initiative, those interviews." I read the reports. She smiled faintly. "You always read the reports?" "It's a habit. Numbers tell the truth long before people do." She nodded, taking a sip. "I know that now." Silence again. comfortable this time. Finally, she said, "For what it's worth. Thank you." I looked at her. "For the lesson or the paycheck?" She smiled, a real one, small but unforced. "Both." The honesty in her voice surprised me more than the words. She leaned forward. "You were right about legacy. It doesn't live in titles. It lives in the people you make uncomfortable enough to grow." "That sounds rehearsed," I said gently. "It is," she admitted. "I've been trying it out in my head for weeks." We both laughed quietly. The sound didn't echo. It simply settled between us, familiar. After a while, she said, "You know, people at the office still talk about that day you walked into the boardroom. Some say it was brutal." "And you?" I asked. She thought for a moment. "I think it was precise." I nodded. "Precision is a kindness in disguise." She looked at me then, really looked. No resentment, no rivalry. "You changed me." "No," I said softly. "You changed yourself. I just refused to let you stop short." A gull cried in the distance, slicing through the quiet. She reached for her phone, glanced at it, then set it face down. "I should go. I've got a meeting with the board this afternoon." "Agenda?" "Implementing mentorship as a permanent division," she said. "They want to make it global." I smiled, almost proud. "The accountant approves." She stood, lifting her empty cup. "You know," she said, glancing toward the horizon, "I used to think success was about how many people answered to me. Now I think it's about how many people remember me kindly." "That's growth," I said. "That's balance," she corrected, and we both smiled. She started to leave, but paused at the edge of the porch. "You know, I never apologized properly for that first brunch." "You didn't need to," I said. "You corrected the math." Her eyes glistened, though she blinked it away quickly. "Goodbye, Maggie." "Goodbye, Sophie." I watched as she walked back to her car, her pace steady, unhurried. She didn't look back. She didn't need to. The sound of the engine faded down the drive until only the sea remained. I turned back to my tea, now gone cold, and looked at the untouched cappuccino beside it. The foam had sunk slightly, but the scent lingered. Bittersweet. Alive. I smiled to myself. She once said my pension couldn't buy a coffee. Now she buys hers with the signature she once mocked. And for the first time in a long, long while, the world and its ledgers felt perfectly balanced.